Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 145. And just a little catch up on what's been going on in the last couple issues. Swamp Thing is finally back in America. Right now he is incognito. He has grown himself a set of human-looking skin in the form of his old friend Matt Cable. And he is being pushed by three mysterious individuals who've been working in the background. There's a shaman named Roberto, a man named L. Blake, who he met when he was in a hallucination, and another man he met in a hallucination who is named the Old Traveler. And they seem to have some kind of background machinations going on where it looks like they are pushing Swamp Thing into some kind of confrontation with some other characters that we've only just seen briefly. And they're directing Swamp Thing to go to the Black Forest in Germany. And the reason he needs to go there is because the Parliament of Trees is after Swamp Thing. They are trying to eradicate him so that they can have a new champion and start over and not have to deal with Linda Holland's Swamp Thing anymore. But the Parliament is not the only people after him. We also have the government now who is after Swamp Thing. Ever since Linda Holland's soul was ripped out of Swamp Thing's body and the soulless Swamp Thing went on a rampage and killed a bunch of Cajuns. So the government has been alerted that there's a crazy Swamp Thing running around. He is dangerous. And they have hired someone named Colonel Strong to take over this manhunt to kill Swamp Thing. And that is where we left off on the last issue with this Colonel Strong watching video of the Swamp Thing in action. So first things first, with issue 145, we got the cover. We see some sort of monster attacking what looks like Matt Cable's Swamp Thing, but the Matt Cable Swamp Thing is mutating, I guess. He's got a really weird looking arm that's got a claw, and half of his face looks like it's distorted, like plants are about to burst out of his skin. And this battle is happening in the foreground, and it seems to be happening in an airplane that is being torn apart by their fight, because we can see airline seats and people flying out into the air out of the damaged fuselage. And we also see on the cover that this issue was written by Mark Miller with art by Phil Hester and Kim DeMolder. And as we turn to the first page, we see that Colonel Nelson is on the hunt. He is in his battle gear and he is walking around the swamps looking for Swamp Thing. And if you don't remember what he looks like from the last issue, basically he is an older white gentleman who's got gray hair. He has a very large, fancy gray mustache. He has an eye patch over his right eye. And of course, he is smoking a pipe. So as he walks around the swamp, we get some narration from him saying, "Ever since I was a boy, I've been afraid of the dark. It is a strange admission to be made by a man in my profession, but I would argue that I have good reason. I am not a coward, you understand. I would not want you to think that I am easily scared. When I was 12 years old, I looked into the heart of the night, and I saw the Green Man. He was 7 feet tall, and he burned with a viridian flame. He vowed that he would take my life, but I promised that I would be ready for him. That night, my eyes were opened to the world beyond our world. I understood what crouched in the shadows, watching us from the darkness. Even now I sleep with the light on, but I would not want you to think I am easily scared." And just as we see this last bit of narration, Colonel Nelson hears something behind him, and as he turns around quickly, he sees one of the Parliament of Trees spider monsters that they sent to the swamp to look for Swamp Thing as well. And if you don't remember what those look like, they look like spiders that are made of wood, and in their abdomen, where they would normally have a face, they just have one big green eye that emits a bright green light so that they can search for Swamp Thing. And we also see on this page that the name of this issue is Big Game, which is kind of fortuitous and funny because Mark Miller just had a new comic book series start that is also named Big Game. And the chances of that happening are pretty slim because I would have had to know that 3 years in advance when I started doing this podcast to time that out correctly. So obviously, it must be fate that I'm reading this issue on this week. But anyway, as we turn the page, we cut to some military personnel waiting in a truck as Colonel Nelson is hunting down the Swamp Thing in the swamps. And this truck has all their electronic gear, so it's probably their mobile headquarters where they can watch and monitor everything. And from the outside of the truck, we hear someone say, "The papers are already comparing the Cajun slaughter to Gotham City, Major North. Reagan's poll rating dropped 30 points after that little fiasco, and now Clinton's getting pretty nervous. What's your situation here?" Then we cut to the inside of the truck and we see the man who was talking is an older white man with gray hair, and he's wearing a red suit, so he's probably some sort of politician. And there's a man in a green uniform standing next to him, who we can assume is Major North, because he replies, "The Swamp Thing is weakened and confused, Mr. Jeshenik. It's hiding in the darkest part of the bayou, and I've hired an expert hunter to bring me its head. You can tell the president his approval rating is quite safe." Then the man in the background that was monitoring all the consoles says, "Disturbance in Sector G, Major North. Nelson Strong has launched some kind of attack." And Major North comes over to the screen and looks at it and says, "It could be another alligator. Any other data?" And the man at the console replies, "The coordinates match the floral intelligence we picked up earlier, sir. This might be our monster." And at the mention of monster, Mr. Jeshenek gets very nervous, and you can see he's visibly sweating, and he's all shaky, and he says, "Jesus Christ, what do we do now?" Then we turn the page and we cut to Colonel Strong in the water of the swamps after he has killed the spider monster, and we see helicopters arrive and they put lights on the area, and then we see some other military personnel walking up to Mr. Strong saying, "You did it, Colonel Strong! You killed the Swamp Thing!" And Colonel Strong turns around and looks at them, and in his hand we can see he's holding the eyeball of that spider monster, and he says to the men, "This isn't the bog monster, you dumb shits. The radar must have tracked this poor bastard by mistake. It seems we aren't the only ones on the tail of the Green Man." And the soldier replies, "What are you talking about? Where's the Swamp Thing?" And as Colonel Strong throws the eyeball in the water and relights his pipe, he says, "Haven't you figured it out yet, boys? Our bird has flown the coop." Then we cut to Kennedy Airport in New York City, and one of the people waiting is a fortune teller, and she's reading a tarot card that's called the Lovers, and she's showing it to someone, and she says, "Look what fate has in store for you, Gilbert. This could be us, couldn't it?" And then we pull out from the card, and we see in the next panel, Gilbert standing next to the fortune teller. She is a larger white woman wearing matching all-purple clothes, and she has messy dark black hair, and she's wearing a necklace of the Egyptian symbol called the Ankh, which I guess represents eternal life. And that looks like a cross with a circle on the top of it. And Gilbert is a white man who's probably in his 20s or 30s. He kind of looks like a blonde Chester. He's got glasses, he's got long hair and a beard. He definitely looks like a 90s hippie who listens to the band Fish. And it doesn't seem like he knows this fortune teller. Like, she just picked him out of a crowd. She likes the way he looks, so she's trying to hit on him by reading his fortune. And he's just walking by her saying, "Sorry, lady, I don't think so. I don't mean to bring you down or anything, but I've been impotent since Zappa died." Then we cut to the lounge where the flight attendants are hanging out, and we see two of them are talking. They're both white women, and the one that's in focus the most kind of looks like Peggy Bundy from Married with Children. And she has long red hair with a headband in it that's keeping it out of her eyes. We can also see that she's having a drink of some kind. We can assume it's alcoholic. And apparently she is watching the fortune teller talk to Gilbert from afar, but she has seen that the fortune teller is reading the tarot cards. So she says to the other flight attendant, "Jesus, this is the 20th century. Why do people still believe in that tarot card bullshit?" And the other flight attendant replies, "Ha, that's rich coming from you, girl. You won't even step on a plane without your lucky charm." Then the first flight attendant pulls out a necklace, and we see it is a cross. And that is the lucky charm the other flight attendant was talking about. So as the first flight attendant looks at the cross, she says, "Yeah, well, this is different. This little baby keeps me in one piece." Then we cut to the restroom in the airport, and we see Matt Cable Swamp Thing is staring at himself in the mirror, although unlike last time in the motel, the mirror does not break. And we see that he's beginning to grow some vegetation stubble again. So he definitely looks pretty rough. And as he stares in the mirror, he pulls out the card that was given to him by the demon magician from the last issue that has the silhouette of a stripper on it. And the words on it say, "Taste forbidden fruit. Call Linda Holland, Amsterdam." So I guess as Matt Cable Swamp Thing is going to head to the Black Forest in Germany, it seems like he's trying to figure out if he's going to actually make a stop in Amsterdam to see if this card is actually referencing his first wife, Linda Holland. But just as he's thinking about that, the loudspeaker in the restroom airport calls out, "Attention, all passengers for flight 401 to Amsterdam. Rows 1 to 66, now boarding." Then we see Matt Cable Swamp Thing put the card back in his jacket. He puts his sunglasses back on to hide his red eyes, and he takes his duffel bag and walks out of the restroom. Then we cut to Matt Cable being in line as the plane is boarding, and the boarding security is saying, "Next." And Swamp Thing walks up and hands the man his ticket, and the man reads it and says, "Mr. Matthew Cable, huh? Bullshit. You think I was born yesterday, bud? And Swamp Thing's kind of taken aback by that, and he says, excuse me? And the man stands up and begins poking him in the chest and says, you're the Swamp Thing, man. Your green ass is busted. Then as Swamp Thing begins to freak out for a second, all of a sudden, we see Dead Man kind of reveal himself to Swamp Thing from inside the security man's body. So just in case you don't know who Dead Man is, he's another DC hero who's from the 70s. His name is Boston Brand, and when he died, he came back as this guy named Dead Man, and his powers are that he can take over someone's body and possess it. And over the years, since he's been introduced, he's appeared in Swamp Thing, usually in Limbo whenever Swamp Thing is going to heaven or hell. Dead Man is the guy who always shows up to help him out because he kind of exists between worlds. And in case you don't know what Dead Man looks like, he's got a bright red suit that has a very large red collar. And then sometimes the man inside varies, like the way they draw him. But in this one, he's definitely more skinny and skeletal-like, and he's got very white skin. So this is more like the Kelly Jones version of Dead Man, which makes sense because that version of Dead Man was coming out around the same time as this comic. So as Dead Man reveals himself, he says to Swamp Thing, I'm only kidding, pal. You remember me. Boston Brand, the dead guy in the red jumpsuit. Boy, you should have seen the look on your face. And then Dead Man, who's still in the security guard, pats Swamp Thing on the back and says, I came here to warn you to stay away from the Black Forest, big fella. And then the two of them begin to walk towards the gate to board the plane. And all the other passengers see is the security guard that was taking everybody's tickets is now walking away from the booth. So they're all mad. They're yelling, hey, where the hell are you going? I got a plane to catch. But Dead Man turns around and says, shove it up your ass, lady. I'm busy. And then Swamp Thing says to Dead Man, the Parliament of Trees seek to destroy me, Boston Brand. I was told that the Black Forest is the one place on Earth I might stand a chance against them. And then Swamp Thing and Dead Man take a seat, and Dead Man says, you want to know why? Because they're scared to death, man. Jesus, I shouldn't even be telling you this, but that place is going to be a hellhole. Then Dead Man gets very serious and looks at Swamp Thing and says, the sorcerer's back, Swamp Guy. Bad shit is happening soon. Then I guess someone else took over taking the tickets because over the loudspeaker we get another announcement that says, last calls for passengers traveling to Amsterdam. Please make your way to gate 4. So Swamp Thing stands up and he says, I am sorry, my friend. I must go. I will miss my plane. And as Swamp Thing walks away from Dead Man yells after him, do yourself a favor, bud. Lie low in Amsterdam. Get high, get laid. Just keep away from Germany. And Swamp Thing replies, good luck, Boston Brand. Thank you for your concern. Then behind Dead Man, someone says, you have acted foolishly, dead creature. You were warned not to interfere. We cannot allow an amateur to disrupt a ritual planned for more than 1 billion years. And we see the man standing behind Dead Man who said that is the old man that Swamp Thing met in the train hallucination he had, who is one of the 3 that is trying to manipulate Swamp Thing to go to Germany and the Black Forest. So Dead Man turns around and says, I'm sorry. I just didn't want to see him get hurt. Then the old traveler says, oh, he will be hurt, Boston Brand. Rest assured, the Swamp Man is no stranger to suffering. And as he says this, the old traveler pulls out something from his pocket, and he looks at it, and we see it as a newspaper clipping that is from the paper that reported on the death of Linda and Holland, which is the origin story from the 70s run of Swamp Thing. Then we cut to the house of Colonel Strong, and he is sitting in his big game room where he keeps all of his trophies from hunting. And all of these trophies are, of course, heads mounted on plaques, but most of them are not of animals like normal. Most of them are cryptids like the Sasquatch or vampires. And most of them, I don't even know what they are. They're just some kind of demons or monsters. So as we focus on the wall of trophies, we hear Colonel Nelson say, I was so close to my game, Haney. I swear to God I could smell him on the evening air. If only I'd gotten there sooner. A day, perhaps. Maybe even just a few hours. I could have had him, damn it. I'm certain of it. Then we cut to Nelson Strong sitting in a big chair in this room, and he's being handed a glass by his servant who is named Haney. And Haney says to him, there's no point in torturing yourself, sir. You are a master in your field, perhaps the greatest huntsman the world has ever known. You will have the Green Man in your sights soon enough. And Haney hands Nelson Strong the drink, and as Strong drinks it, he says, I've waited 50 years for this, Haney. I'm not giving up now. And as we turn the page, we go to a flashback of Nelson Strong as a child, and I guess he's telling Haney this story. And in these panels, we see 4 teenage boys playing in the grass outside. There are no adults around. And the narration over this says, "My parents were stationed in England at the end of the last war. I had always preferred the company of adults, but it made my parents happy to see me play with the local children." So one of these 4 boys is Nelson as a child, and the other 3 are local British kids. And one of them is saying, "Come on, Nelson, don't be such a poofter. It's only a game." And Nelson replies, "I'm not eating wild mushrooms. They might be poison." And the British boy replies, "Don't talk shite. I've eaten them hundreds of times. It's the only way to see the green man." But Nelson looks down ashamed and says, "But what if they're poison?" And the British kids don't like that he's so scared, so they all walk away from Nelson, and the one that was talking to him says, "Oh, piss off, Nelson. You coming or not?" And another one of the kids says, "I've had enough of this bollocks. No wonder everybody thinks he's a wanker." Then we cut to later that day at nighttime, and Nelson is sitting in his room playing solitaire, and his narration says, "Eating the mushrooms from the hangman's tree was supposed to induce visions of the green man. It was a local rite of passage, and I hated myself for being so afraid. I didn't care what the others thought, but I couldn't let it beat me. I had to see the green man for myself." And under this narration, we're seeing a young Nelson sneak out of his window and head to the hangman's tree. And under the light of a full moon, we see a young Nelson eating mushrooms that are growing off the side of that tree. And the narration says, "I don't know how many mushrooms I ate that night. 100, maybe 200. I lost count." And we see a very full and gorged Nelson fall over on his back with crumbs of mushroom all over his face. And as he stares up at the moon, he begins to have visions. At first, he sees some flowers. Then he sees a windmill. Then he sees a skeleton burning. Then he's holding a heart in his hands. Then we see a picture of Stonehenge. And then we see the flowers again. And over these panels, we get narration. And I'm going to read this in young Nelson's voice because it seems like they're coming from him, because these are coming from young Nelson's hallucinations. So he starts off saying, "Tulips, tulips dancing in the wind, windmills turning slowly, in the distance, and something burning. Is that me? Is that me burning? A human heart petrifies and turns to dust. The Parliament of Stones has selected their champion. Is that me? Open your eyes. Open your eyes and see who will destroy you." And as young Nelson opens his eyes, he has a vision of Alec Holland Swamp Thing standing before him. But this isn't the nice version of the Alec Holland Swamp Thing. This one has big claws on his hands, and he looks a bit more scary and monstrous. And as young Nelson looks terrified at this Swamp Thing, the older Nelson narrates, "The green man looked at me, and I heard a little voice in my head screaming in colors, and I thought, how do I fight that?" Then we see the young Nelson pass out, and old Nelson narrates, "And then I shit my pants." Then we cut out of the flashback and back into the trophy room of Nelson Strong, and he is now standing and looking at the trophies on his wall. And the way that the head trophies are arranged, it looks like there's a spot that's missing one on the wall. And as Nelson looks at this spot, his narration says, "When I was 12 years old, I looked into the night and it stared back at me with an intelligent hatred. I knew for the first time what man feared in the darkness. There are monsters in this world, and we must face them alone. We must destroy these creatures before they consume everything we cherish. I have hunted every horror that has walked or crawled, but it is the green man I most desire. An empty space hangs in the heart of my trophy room, waiting. I want the head of the greatest monster of them all." Then we cut to a commercial airline plane flying in the night sky, and they're flying through a lightning storm. Then we cut to the inside of that plane, where we see a mother comforting her child, and the child is crying, and the mom is saying, "Don't cry, honey. It was just a bad dream." And the little girl is saying, "It wasn't a dream, Mommy. It was real. I saw them. The Parliament of Trees are trying to find a way onto the plane, Mommy. They're sending something to kill the green man." Then we see a flight attendant approach them, and she sees the girl crying, so she asks, "What's the matter, sweetheart? Is something wrong?" And the mom replies to her, "I'm sorry. It's her first time on an airplane. She's only 4. Then we cut to where Swamp Thing is sitting on the plane, and he happens to be sitting next to the tarot card reader. And she's talking to him saying, "Excuse me, Mr. Cable, you're supposed to hand the tarot cards back." So Swamp Thing hands her back the card and says, "I am sorry. I did not mean to be rude. My mind was elsewhere." But it doesn't seem like the tarot card reader is very annoyed or anything. She actually throws down another card and says, "Let's see what fate has in store for you, Mr. Matt Cable. A cure for that terrible laryngitis, I hope." Then as the card lands on the seat tray in front of her, she looks kind of freaked out and says, "Oh." And of course, Swamp Thing is intrigued and says, "What is it? Bad news?" And the tarot card reader replies, I don't know. This card shouldn't even be here. I wonder what it means." Then we get a look at the card, and it is the card of the Magus, which I'm going to assume is a reference to John Constantine the Hellblazer, who we haven't seen yet in this Mark Millar run, but showed up pretty frequently in most of the other runs in Swamp Thing. Then we cut to that hippie guy Gilbert from the beginning of the airport scene, and the flight attendant is delivering his food, which of course is the special order vegetarian menu, which I'm sure at this time in 1994 was a pretty special request to make. So as the flight attendant delivers his meal, she says, "Here's your vegetable casserole, Mr. Freak. Watch your fingers, it's very hot." And as Gilbert looks at his meal, he says, "Wow, this looks totally delicious." But across the aisle, one of the other passengers, who kind of looks like Roseanne Barr, says, "Christ, that smells like shit. I don't know how anybody can eat that rabbit food." And Gilbert looks at her and replies, "Just watch me, sister. This is the first decent meal I've had in months." Which, if you think about it, is pretty sad because airline food is generally terrible. And as Gilbert is talking to her, out of the corner of his eye, he catches a look at the tarot card reader who is waving to him, trying to get his attention and giving him flirtatious looks. But Gilbert kind of ignores her, and then he pokes one of the vegetables on his tray, which looks like a Brussels sprout, and he brings it up to his face and he says, "Geez, suddenly I've lost my appetite." Then as the flight attendant walks down the aisle, someone says to her, "Cindy, oh Christ, come quickly." And it turns out that the person calling to Cindy is the other flight attendant who had the cross at the airport. So Cindy runs to her and says, "What's the matter, Tina? You scared the shit out of me." And Tina replies, "I've lost it, Cindy. It's gone. I've lost my lucky charm." And she's talking about her cross necklace. And apparently she's very superstitious because she looks extremely worried about this. Then we cut back to the hippie guy Gilbert, and we see the Brussels sprout that was on his fork fall off seemingly on its own and roll to the center of the aisle. And Gilbert says, "Hey, what the hell?" Then all the lights go out in the cabin, and he says, "Shit, what happened to the lights? My Brussels sprout, it just leapt clean off the plate." Then we see the Brussels sprout in the middle of the aisle, and it begins to sprout and grow. And because the lights went out, of course, that little girl from earlier is freaked out, and she says, "Oh, Mommy, they're going to kill us. They found a way in." And the mom chastises her, saying, "Cassie, be quiet." But Cassie doesn't stop. She keeps yelling, saying, "Stop them, Mommy, before it's too late." And then I guess because the situation is very stressful with the lights out and it's very scary on the plane, the mom snaps back at Casey, "For Christ's sake, Cassie, shut up. There's nothing to be scared of. Jesus, get the stewardess. My kid's having a fit." Then we cut to Swamp Thing and all this, and he apparently has a Zippo lighter with him, so he lights it and he says, "Please, let me help. I used to be a doctor." But as the light begins to emanate from the fire, it reveals a plant monster that is standing right in front of Swamp Thing. And it doesn't waste any time. It shoots its arm out, striking Swamp Thing, and it bursts him through the side of the aircraft, but Swamp Thing is able to grab on part of the hand that pushed him out, so he is just dangling outside as the plane begins to shake and dive. Then the swamp monster turns its attention to the other passengers, and Gilbert yells out, "Jesus, no! My stomach! What are you doing to my stomach?" And as we turn the page, we see it's not just him. All the other passengers are writhing in pain as plants begin to explode out of their orifices all at once. So it seems this plant monster is making all their gut flora grow extremely fast and overtaking their body. And Swamp Thing, who's outside the plane holding on for dear life, is seeing this, and his skin begins to burst as well, but not because of the plant monster. It's because he's extremely stressed out and he's wanting to save these people. And so as his plant form begins to take shape, he yells out, "No, don't hurt those people." Then we cut to the cockpit and we see even the pilot is having plants grow out of him. So the plane takes a complete nosedive, but even as that's happening, the plant monster begins to grow vines that wrap around the entire plane. Then as we turn the page, we see the plane explode in the air because I guess the plant vines crushed it. And we see on the ground below is the old traveler who watches this explosion. And as he's lit by the flames of the blast, he says, "Welcome to Amsterdam, Alec Holland. "It is time to play the next stage in our most dangerous game." And then he looks down in the palm of his hand, and we see the cross that belonged to the stewardess Tina, that was her lucky charm, is in his hand like he somehow stole it from her. And he begins to focus on it, and his eyes turn red, and the gold cross melts in his hand. Then we cut to the bedroom of Nelson Strong, and he is screaming as he wakes up from a nightmare. And his servant Haney hears this scream, so he comes to the door and says, "Colonel Strong, are you all right, sir?" And Colonel Strong sits up in his bed and he says, "I know where he is. Jesus Christ, I know where he is." Then we cut to the mission control of the government Swamp Thing hunting team, and we hear from outside the building one of the men say, "Telephone call on the blue phone, Major North. The big game hunter has located our missing subject." Then we cut to the inside and we see Major North say, "Where is he? Where is the Swamp Thing?" Then as Major North takes the phone, we hear Nelson on the other line say, "The game's over, Major. The monster's in Holland. I want a jet on standby to pick me up in 40 minutes. And Major North replies, "Now hold on a minute, slow down. We need concrete evidence." But Nelson will not calm down. He very angrily says, "I said he's in Holland, mister. I've been after this bastard for nearly 50 years. I've got him in my sights at last." And then he angrily hangs up on Major North. And the last panel of this issue is Nelson Strong standing in the dark with his fist raised, and he looks very determined and angry. And his narration over this panel says, "The sides had been picked and all the pieces were falling into place. At last, it was time to play my favorite game, murder in the dark." And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, at gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.